Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Drone Pioneers podcast. People do the flying, where we take special care about the people of the industry and not only the technology and the advancements of the drones themselves. I'm very glad that today we have Angelina Tsuboi with us. Angelina Tsuboi is an um, aerospace cybersecurity specialist. She has prior software engineer studies, and she's together with us from Los Angeles. Hello, Angelina.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm really excited to talk a little bit more about my work and talk a little bit more about drones in relation to space security.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very excited to have you here. How is Los Angeles this time of the year? How is life in Los Angeles?
Yeah, life is pretty good. It is on the colder side of things, but like in Los Angeles, that isn't very cold at all. I guess like I'm used to the really nice weather here, but yeah, overall rain this morning, but a lot of weather just cleared up and it's a great day. How about
Well,
yourself?
yeah, well, Athens, Athens is, we were supposed to have some really bad weather, but actually there was no bad weather at all. Sometimes these days, meteorology is like a crystal ball, all the
Mhm.
time predictions and nothing comes up. Yeah, well, you live in Los Angeles, and for many people, Los Angeles, it's a magical place. All they see it on films and like that, and you get to actually live in
Yeah.
that place. So let's talk about drones before we go all the way to aerospace security, or aerospace cybersecurity. Let's talk about drones cybersecurity and how you got into drone cybersecurity.
Yeah, so I started off, like you mentioned, with a software background. So I was initially in software development and computer science. However, throughout the way, I did a lot of open source projects and I got really into open source development. And a few years ago, I got a job offer to work at a cybersecurity startup to do security work. And during that time, I learned a lot about cybersecurity. And during that time as well, I also got an internship opportunity at NASA. And that's where things really coalesced into a strong passion of mine, which is my focus now, which is aerospace development and security. It was really cool to see the coalition of all the things I was really passionate about. I was passionate about space from NASA. I was passionate about cybersecurity systems, drones, was a passion of mine from the beginning. I flew my DJI Mini 2 around a lot to do drone photography, so that was the sector I was interested in, and just as a side passion of mine. And then coding and software development. And I first got into drones after looking into digital forensics with them. So I did a lot of blue team stuff with them, trying to reverse engineer DJI communication protocols using tools like Wireshark, alongside doing development for DJI SD card data artifact auditing in order to check for crimes that may have occurred throughout the flight. So let's say a DJI drone was compromised committing a specific crime. Users will be able to forensically analyze an SD card of a downed drone of that DJI variant and locate any indices of crime behavior.
So you mentioned DJI, down drone, and that with the use of digital forensics with an SD card, you can get valuable info and valuable data. Like what?
Yes.
Location? What kind of data can you retrieve?
Yeah. Yeah. So for DJI drones specifically, they have a artifact logging system, and artifacts are like specific metrics of a flight. For example, it'll track down GPS locations, altitude, and other telemetry values, how high it's off the ground, where it's relatively situated, its attitude, yaw, pitch, roll, etc. And it logs it into the SD card, which is responsible for holding data. And all those values have a timestamp associated with them. So you could look through the path the drone had assumed throughout its flight. And this is really helpful for investigators who want to figure out what the drone has been doing. For example, if a drone was caught compromised on the ground, let's say crashed into an object after it was trying to spy on some people or drop off drugs at a prison. Contraband drop off is pretty popular with drones. You'll be able to take that drone, get the SD card, and you could sift through various details about where the drone has been, sensor configurations, and so forth.
Okay, very interesting. Now, as we have mentioned the last time we have talked together, plenty people in the drone industry, plenty of drone operators. We are not really tech savvy. We know how to operate the machinery,
Yeah.
but we not necessarily, have a technical aptitude or a technical background. You are into training. I suppose you have seen what I mentioned. And how do you bridge that gap? How do you talk to people who will not necessarily
Mm,
know what Wireshark is, what digital
yeah.
forensics is? How do you talk to simple drone operators?
Yeah, so education has been a huge thing for me over the years. I've been teaching workshops for years now, and I started off actually teaching kids about STEM, and that was really helpful because especially when you're teaching kids, you have to make sure you get everything very simple, very baseline, and then build off of that baseline level of skill and make that very clear. So for classes where I do anything space security related, I make sure to approach it from a very foundational level. I assume that everyone attending my class will be relatively a beginner, and most of the people that do attend my classes are beginners. And we do go through basic definitions, like what is a drone, what is a UAS, like what
Okay.
are various components that make up a drone, and then from there we add more layers of abstraction. And I make sure whenever I do a class, we do something called a simulated environment test, or like a simulated environment setup or lab, in order to interactively introduce specific concepts to students who attend. So for example, for the drone UAV cybersecurity class I did, we went through very beginner level workshops where, for example, I was teaching them how to audit a very, very simple network capture analysis file. So drones communicate with remote controllers and pilots on the ground using communication of radio packets. And things like Wireshark is a software that can analyze those radio packets being transmitted by the drone in order to get information. So we were teaching beginners how to obtain information, communication information from drones from scratch by making the testing scenario interactive, but also basic. So like they can follow along the step-by-step instructions, and if they mess up, it's no big deal. There's always helpers around to help them improve their knowledge.
Okay, and from a cybersecurity point, more and more drones are in the air. From a cybersecurity point, what do you see as a weakness for drones? What are the main
Mm.
weaknesses you can find in drones? And what have you seen, on the field?
Yeah, I would say from my experience in the drone field and with space systems in general, a lot of their communications are rooted in a lot of their problems with the cybersecurity are rooted within how they communicate. And typically it's the communication between the drone and the pilot on the ground that is really vulnerable. Because most off-the-shelf commercial drones use a radio link that's uses Wi-Fi to send data, and there's a lot of research already done on how to hack Wi-Fi. It's a very pervasive technology and hackers are very, very good at exploiting it. So they could take a pre-canned hacking system where it's already very researched, very holistic, and then apply it to drones.
At what cost? At what cost could a hacker create a problem to drone operators?
Yeah, so we've seen multiple commercial off-the-shelf drones being manipulated in ways they shouldn't be. So for example, hackers on the ground can shut off the drone while it's flying by sending it spoofed commands. It could also read in on what the drone is doing. So any data it might be collecting.
For people who don't know what is a spoofed command, what is spoofing? For people who
Yeah,
don't know.
so spoofing is an act of creating something that doesn't really exist in order to trick a system. So, for example,
Like a false
yeah,
identity. Okay.
yeah. So for example, like when you're controlling a drone, your remote control is sending data to the drone, telling it specific commands like move forward, move back, move up, move down. And you're sending the drone those commands by actuating the joysticks, like moving the joysticks around, and the internal circuitry of the remote control is sending it to the drone. However, a hacker can kind of do the same thing. They can pretend to be you, pretend to be the pilot sending the commands, and send out what's called spoofed packets, where it seems like it's sending out data that the pilot on the ground would send, but it's actually a hacker doing it. And that could result in a wide range of repercussions. You can send it commands like move forward when the pilot wants it to move backward, like move it up to really, really low altitude and cause it to crash into something. So
Okay, so a
that's not
hacker
good.
disguises and pretends that he is you, that he's the
Yes.
operator. Okay,
Yes.
but how much would the cost? Because some people don't know that. How much does the equipment cost for a hacker to do that? Is it expensive equipment, or is it a few $100s?
Yeah, so it depends on the drone you're trying to hack into. For most off-the-shelf commercial drones, it's relatively cheap. I would say $100 worth of equipment at maximum because most of them use Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi just need a general like
So you
2.1
might be
gigahertz
flying.
antenna.
So you might be flying, $1,000 drones, and a guy with $100 of equipment can hijack or
Yes,
crash your drone. Okay, that's very very interesting.
yes. Yeah, but for more specialized drones that use more obscure communication systems for their signals intelligence, like sending information, and use encryption, it's harder
Okay,
to bypass security regulations, and then you're talking thousands of dollars with the equipment.
okay,
But it's
uh,
still like if you're trying to target like a highly specialized UAS, that could still result in more damage.
okay, yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. And how can somebody countermeasure it? You mentioned before, whether it is for good or for evil, that when there is it's let's say a DJI drone with an SD card. From the SD card, you can take some relevant data. But if I'm flying my DJI drone without an SD card, will that make it more difficult for you to obtain data,
Mhm.
from that crash drone?
Yeah. So, for example, in the digital forensic scenario, let's say you were just flying without an SD card.
Yes.
It does eliminate one attack surface, but it doesn't eliminate the entire risk of attack. So, yes, it does mitigate risk to an extent. But however, like when you're thinking from a cybersecurity standpoint, a system you're analyzing, especially for something as complex as drones, you're going to have to analyze multiple attack surfaces. And there's multiple so for example, like let's say a burglar wanted to like hijack into a house. There's like multiple ways it can hijack into a house. So you can break through the windows, you can lockpick the door, like those are different attack surfaces,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
For a drone, it's the same way, same thing. Like let's say you remove an SD card, its communication link is still going to be vulnerable. There's you can still spoof GPS signals to it and cause it to lose
Thank you
track
for
of
the
where it's located.
analogy. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you for the analogy between a house and a burglar and doors and windows. It's very enlightening for people, as I told you, who don't really know the technical
right.
details. Okay, so what do you think a drone operator can do to defend himself? Are there any options, any choices, or since we were using, a drone that we just buy and take from the shelf and it's a ready, drone, we can't really do much about it.
I would say there's two primary risk mitigation systems a person who is into drones and wants to purchase one can make. One is doing a lot of pre-rescue research about the drone. So, for example, there's some brands that are notorious for having very insecure systems. And also within like highly regarded companies, as well, there's specific drones that don't have secure communications. So for example, DJI is relatively secure. It's hard because it's a big company. They dominate the market share. And they have a lot of funding to implement encryption. They will implement encryption, and it does take someone who is tech savvy to hack into it, I would say. And it does take extensive research to hack into a DJI system. But for example, more companies who don't really have the funding or the scale, they're more likely, like for example, like cheap off-the-shelf commercial drones usually use Wi-Fi. They're very easy to hack into. So I think you can really mitigate a lot of risk by analyzing the drone you're going to buy and doing your research. And then let's say you already have a drone, then there are specific things you can do in order to minimize risk of attack. So let's say, for example, a person was trying to jam a communication link from drone. Jamming is when, let's say you get like another transmitter on the ground, you're pretty much bypassing the communication between the drone and the pilot by interfering the signal. So like you're sending really weird signals, and that doesn't allow the drone to communicate with the pilot anymore. And now you have a rogue drone that can't be instructed to do anything. So just drone just like staying there. So in instances like that, yes, you can mitigate it. So for example, you can make yourself a harder target. So you can change the direction and attitude of the drone. Like let's say you're moving around all over the place. It's harder for the attacker to jam the communication link. In other more covert ways, let's say they want to run a Wi-Fi attack, then there's like multiple Wi-Fi defense mechanisms you can use. Or let's say I would say also look into the communication protocol. It uses because different drones uses different communication protocols. Some use Wi-Fi, some use a protocol called Zigbee, which is a little bit harder to hack into, in my opinion. So I would say 3 things: research, very specific like maneuver-like mechanisms to evade attacks, mostly related to signals intelligence, like removing an SD card or like moving your drone sporadically so it can't get jammed.
Do some fancy flying, yeah. Do not stay stable and do some fancy flying, yeah.
Yeah, and then research about the communication. So like looking into the transmitter and the receiver, the transceiver of the drone itself, and seeing which protocols it uses, because a lot of vulnerabilities in relation to drones is with their communication.
Okay, has this study been done by anyone? Is there any, internet site where someone has done this study and can suggest this or don't buy this? Is there any site that you can suggest? Okay.
Yes, I would say there's multiple resources. I would say resources are sparse, but there are good high quality ones out there. One, I would recommend looking into open source projects. There's some by an elite hacker called Sammy Kamkar, who did an extensive research on drones, and he created something called Skyjack, where you can fly any rogue drone and have it manipulate like its own swarm of drones. It's really cool. So you can see how research and how he was able to reverse engineer specific things about the drone and get information about it and exploit the system. I would also recommend looking into DEF CON talks. DEF CON has a specific aerospace village, and it's not all about drones, but some of it is about drones. And I'm sure they have a few CTFs out there you could experiment with. And lastly, there's academic papers. It's a little bit harder to learn from because they're abstract and really hard to like tactically experiment with. And usually they have thousands of dollars of funding.
We are lazy. We're lazy guys. We prefer if someone has done it before us. We don't want to read all the academic stuff. Sorry.
Yeah, but like for me, it's helpful for understanding the conceptual stuff because like they get really technical. So like it helps you develop a good mindful framework for understanding the verbiage which is used in more open source kind of projects.
Okay.
So I would say that would be the last resource I would recommend.
Now we've been talking about open source projects.
Yeah.
You know, to me, open source is very nice. I really like that there is open source, but I understand that open source means that it can be used like a knife for good
Right.
and for evil. It can be used from good
Right.
people and, you know, from the bad guys. What do you think about that? Since you've been involved in open source, what precautions, what measures have you taken, or you
Yeah.
suggest people to take so open source is not easily used by the bad guys?
Yeah. I've made a few security frameworks myself, and that has been a point of concern. I would say what I see a lot of open source developers, especially in the security field, doing is putting some kind of license that's prohibited by nature. You know, like there's still people that are going to look for the code. Also, a note of caution, like making sure like it's all for ethical purposes. Like it may just be implicit, but it does help more than because I think a lot of confusion happens when there's no explicit message in the documentation saying, hey, this is dangerous, please be ethical with it. There's no like no, and then it gets exploited. But if you're very forthright about it being security focused and only used for research purposes, um, I would say that's mindful. And lastly, like cutting out features that you know are specifically dangerous. So let's say I knew this feature of my code, I could possibly add an extra feature um, that could compromise the drill system and demonstrate to others. I wouldn't add it.
Okay, so being mindful of what you actually create, you
Yes.
know, before it, you know, it goes in bad guys, in the hands of bad guys. Uh, are you into art? Are you painting or something? Because I see some very interesting paints, you know, in the background. Is
Yeah.
any of this your stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I am not, those
Do
aren't
you mind?
mine,
Do
but
you
I
mind
am,
showing? Do you mind showing something to us? After all,
yes.
it's not
Yeah.
only
Yeah.
about technology. It's about the people. It's not only about, you know, taking knowledge out of you. It's knowing who you are. So if you want to share some of your art with us.
Yeah, so I am a maker, and like I like digital art and art in general. I like spray painting. It's like a hobby I got into when I lived in Venice Beach. I used to live in Venice Beach before I moved to a different part of Los Angeles,
Yeah.
and that introduced me to a lot of culture, and a lot of interesting experiences. But now I moved out. I'm in my own like personal lab setup, running my
Show
business.
us some of your art. You know, bring something close if you don't mind to the camera, and so showcase something if you don't mind.
Yeah, I
What
mean, I
is
could
it?
show you my lab in the background.
Okay.
It's very like I'm just getting it set up. But you know, I do a lot of fabrication. So there's a 3D printer back there. I'm currently making a cube. I really like doing fun side engineering projects for fun.
Okay.
So one thing I'm doing is building a satellite kit.
Okay.
So like I'm 3D printing satellite chassis systems currently, doing scientific research. Yeah, just pretty eclectic stuff. Photography I also like doing. I live in a really beautiful place in Los
Okay.
Angeles. So, like I
Yeah.
take photos a lot, different like species of animals and plants. I'm also really into physics. That chart back there is an electromagnetic spectrum
Okay.
chart that I reference all the time. Like, it's one of the most foundational diagrams in my um in my like understanding of science and STEM. So it's a really nice reference to like look at. I think environment is really key, especially um where you work, because you're like no matter what's there, you're gonna see it and you're gonna think about it. It might be subliminally, but you're still gonna think about it. So I like setting up a nice environment where like I can think about things and it's creative and it allows for work
Yeah,
to get done.
it's an ongoing influence. Yeah, all the time you're,
Yeah.
yeah, influencing yourself to keep doing that, you know, which is your passion, your field. Yeah, that's very nice. You mentioned Venice Beach. You know, Los Angeles, I know a little bit because I've been in Long Beach a long time ago, but Venice Beach, I haven't been. So how is, you know, the only thing I know about Venice Beach is Sting the wrestler. If you don't know, if you know anything about pro wrestling. So how was Venice Beach living there?
It was very interesting. It was super interesting. I think for the long term, I wouldn't recommend it. It's not a very stable place. However, if you're trying to like have fun and like be creative, I think that it will definitely give you that because it's unlike any other place I've ever lived in my life. It was very chaotic. Like you're no matter what you're doing, there's always going to be like people doing 20 different things around you all at once, and it's like super stimulating. So that's fun for a while and makes you creative, makes you like very accepting of people, very diverse people, so many really interesting, weird people that you
Okay.
never really get to see. So I met that there. So I think it makes me really, I mean, I think it had a good influence on me
Okay.
as a whole. I think it made me very accepting of different counterculture or like different perspectives and work through differences with people and understand things that hold us together and unify us, like culture, art, and they can be different things. But I think um, understanding where they're coming from and where their interests are and seeing them express their passion for something is an amazing trait I got from living in
You had to deal with plenty of different people, yeah, and that that was a challenge. It's always a challenge to mingle with different people, especially if they're too much different than what you are
yeah,
and what you're used to. Have you
yeah.
been to many places? Have you traveled to many places? Lived in many places?
Not necessarily. I mean, I've been to places like different states in America. Um, Internationally, I haven't really been to many places. I've been to Japan a few times because my mom's from there.
Okay.
So I had the pleasure, I had opportunities to go there, like, thankfully. But other than
Europe?
that, yeah, Europe. I went to Switzerland for a school trip, but that's it.
Okay, that's nice.
Yeah,
Switzerland, it's also a really different environment than Japan
100%.
or the US. It's totally different. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about satellites. And you have an understanding, a different understanding about airspace. We drone guys, some of us understand what airspace is. Some of us don't really understand anything, besides a few hundred meters. But you have a different understanding because you deal with the assets, from the ground all the way to satellites.
Yeah.
So, what is, a concept that you would like to convey to us about airspace?
Yeah, so I had the um fortunate experience of working with different like space settings in different communities around here, which is amazing. I worked with satellites, I've worked with planes because I'm a pilot, and I've seen different avionics systems, and I've worked with drones. Um, they're all very interesting, but I think one pattern that ties them together is their lack of modern technologies and how that's really creating a problem for them. So a lot of satellites in orbit, they're running code and firmware from the 60s and the 70s.
Okay.
So like there's like 4chan. The Voyager, it's running 4chan code. It's running a little bit of C, a little bit of 4chan. And a lot of the firmware is not up to date, making it vulnerable to cyber attacks.
Okay.
You're seeing the same with ADSB. ADSB is a communication radar system for planes, and planes, the FAA, it's been around for decades, and they've just used the same technology over and over and over again. However, when you're dealing with a very dynamic field like cybersecurity, you can't, just because a technology worked in the past doesn't mean it's vulnerable. It's not vulnerable now.
Okay.
It always has to adapt, but I, I think the aviation and space sectors, they've been very adaptive in some ways. They've been very adaptive in the machinery that's been built in terms of research and discovery and like optimizing for speed, optimizing for various like physical standards. But when you're thinking of things from a digital perspective, it hasn't really changed. It's
Yeah.
been stagnant for a very
You
long
have
time.
mentioned another time we talked that things are not built with security in mind.
Yeah.
there's a special term you used about that.
Yes, it's called secure by design. And I am noting now that there is a huge push on getting secure by design principles instilled within the general discourse of space security. And you're seeing organizations like the DoD and various other companies obliging to these protocols. But it's just very recently where there's actual standards and guidelines being like, okay, you need to inspect this, and this of a drone, like the onboard computer, the radio system,
Yeah,
and you need to like make sure it follows these guidelines and make sure it's secure. There
okay.
hasn't been a push for that in terms of the broad history of space security until now.
Okay, but is the industry going to allow that? Because I've been thinking that some people are only trying to make money, and that means, lower the cost, get it, get it done as soon as possible. So I understand why they don't have security in mind. Is the industry going to allow, the process of making something which is secured by design if it is more costly and it takes more time to get it done? What's your
Yeah, so from a economic perspective, I think this is interesting as well because you're seeing as more and more of these technologies are being deployed and developed, the you're if systems are so easy to hack into now, let's say if it economically, what I'm trying to say is it economically makes more sense for a company to save money in the long run to emphasize cybersecurity. It's actually beneficial to the company because in the long run, these attacks are going to get easier and easier and easier. And as it gets easier, the amount of expense that it could possibly cause could really have a huge dent to a company.
Well,
And
the big problem with that is that usually companies don't understand that until something happens.
until
Usually,
something happens, like
yeah,
you don't foresee anything. You're just
it's the same in close protection. They think security is something that costs money until something happens and they realize that it could have saved them the problem, the time, all that.
Yeah. So it's
Uh,
good to, it's very good in general in cybersecurity, always be vigilant, always look out for, make sure you solve a problem while it's small rather than, having to put out a huge fire later on. It's easier to put out a flame than to deal with a catastrophic issue because you didn't resolve it in the first place.
Okay, so what are your projects to at this moment, and where can one find you?
Yeah, so some projects I'm working on now are under my business, StillRx Labs, and we're working specifically on aerospace security training. We're starting off with satellites, but we might do things centered around drones and aircraft in the future. So if you're interested, I would recommend checking out my company, stillrxlabs.com. That's the domain name. And I'm still doing open source work, cybersecurity. I'm putting an emphasis on AI now. So you'll see probably a few AI applications come within the next few weeks alongside my personal security research and research on photonic systems, which is like things having to do with lasers in a space setting, which I'm also very interested in. If you want to find more information about me, you can go to my website, angelinatsuboi.com. You can also visit my social profiles. My Twitter is just my name, Angelina Tsuboi. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
X, you are there.
X, Instagram, anything works.
Okay, since today our time is limited, I'm not going to, make more questions. I would like to have you for a second time at some point when it is easy for you, because there are many concepts I would like to discuss more with you. That's all for today. I would like to thank our viewers, and I would like to go and check Angelina and what she's doing. What she's doing is very, very interesting, and I expect it will become more and more relevant as time goes by. That's all for today for the Drone Pioneers podcast. I hope you enjoy, and you more than you enjoy, I hope that you find beneficial what you see on this podcast. And if you like it, subscribe, share, all the things that people do online these days to support something they like. Thank you very much. And that's all for today. Bye.
All right. Thank you all. See you later. Thank you so much.
Yeah.